Hi there, this is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films, and welcome to another video. Today, just for a bit of fun, I'm going to rank my second sight limited editions. I didn't think I had that many, but I've actually got 24. Obviously most of these get standard editions after a certain period. This company, again, there's not really a kind of set formula for their releases. They are a bit random at times. I think they've been talking about doing a restoration of Dog Soldiers for a while, but if you know the history of that film, you know that prints and negatives of that are pretty hard to get a hold of, so they're still working on that one. I think they have started releasing more 4Ks, the Babadook and the Guest and The Witch is coming soon as well, for those of you with 4K capability. So I'm just going to go through these. I've ranked them 24 to 1. Again, this is just personal preference, and this is not an objective ranking or anything. I'm not going to talk too much in detail about them and the features, but some of the features do kind of stand out and are kind of interesting, but I'm just ranking them as far as how much I enjoy the film, not the entire release. So, I mean, to me, all these films are good to really good. But again, you can let me know in the comments what your favourite second sight limited edition is. I mean, again, I'm not going to get them all. There's things like Paranormal Activity that I'm just not interested in. But at number 24 is The Strangers, which is very similar to a French film called Them, even though apparently it wasn't an influence. This is a fairly standard urban horror home invasion. Liv Tyler and her fiance, I guess, are trapped in a house, and these three characters are tormenting them. But what's kind of interesting about this one is there's an interview with the writer-director, and it's actually fascinating because he's one of those guys that pretty much left Texas, just turned up in Hollywood because he wanted to get into films. He wrote this script. It eventually got kind of picked up. He took meetings on it, but then he was fired off the project, and he took other meetings in Hollywood as his career kind of moved on, and he always heard about his script and always wondered what was happening to his script. And then it ended up coming back full circle to him, and he ended up as somebody in his 20s actually getting to make the film. So his interview is kind of fascinating as far as, we all have perhaps, well, not now, but we used to have this idea, oh yeah, you just go to Hollywood, you write a script, and all of a sudden your film gets made. It's not quite that simple. So that's a kind of fascinating journey. The film itself is fairly standard fare, and to be honest, it's probably one of the ones, there's not a lot of these that I would probably move on from once I clear my backlog, but The Strangers probably is one that I'll move on from. I don't think I would be rewatching it very often. Next is the Willy Benn double feature, or A Boy and His Rat films. Willard's a lot of fun with Bruce Davison, and then Ben is the kind of PG kids one that quite a lot of films kind of do in sequels. They get a kid involved and it ends up being like a PG, and completely different from the original film that actually inspired the sequel. But they're fun. Ernest Borgnine turns up in Willard, and rats ensue. Next is When a Stranger Calls, or Scream Before Scream, or Scream without the meta stuff. And this one also has the TV movie When a Stranger Calls Back. It's a fun little film. Next is Revenge, which is as colourful as the box. This is a fairly linear, straightforward story of a girl who gets invited to the middle of nowhere and then gets used, abused and left for dead in a very painful manner, and then strangely enough she takes revenge. Looks beautiful, and it's a kind of fun film for what it is, but don't expect too much from it. Next is The Craze by Peter Medak, who's a pretty interesting director. His career is a bit all over the place, but even his films that don't work completely usually have something interesting in them. And he also did stuff like The Ruling Class, which is absolutely amazing. This is an interesting version of The Craze. According to Medak, Stanley Kubrick said this should be in a British museum for being the most accurate portrayal of the Craze. There's a wonderful interview with Medak because he actually met the Craze in the 60s when he was an AD on a film which was filming in the Craze neck of the woods, and they actually turned up on set and pretty much said, "You didn't get our permission to film here." So Medak was actually in a unique position to make a film about the Craze. And his interview is absolutely fascinating. There's an interview with the producer, who you'll probably recognise his face because he is an actor as well, or was an actor. I think he was in Scum, the Alan Clark film. But he produced this, and originally Roger Daltrey had the rights, and the making of the film is actually really fascinating. In the film itself, it's actually not about the Kemp brothers as the Craze. It's actually Billie Whitelaw's film, really, and she's wonderful in it. The film's actually almost taken from the women's perspective. Yeah, it might not be completely successful, but it has a lot going for it, including Steven Berkoff just dropping in from almost another planet and chewing scenery like you wouldn't believe. And Billie Whitelaw is fantastic, but this is one of the releases that the extras are absolutely fascinating. It doesn't quite capture the Craze sense of, they were big fans of the gangster films with George Raft, and then it ended up in the 60s George Raft actually fronted one of their hotels and was a meter and greeter for the Craze, which is kind of surreal because they had like 14 clubs at one point in London. So the interview with Medak's absolutely fascinating, and so is the interview with the producer, who went to both prisons where the Craze were to talk to them about, can we make a film which was based on a book that had been written about them. So that's in it. Perhaps the film might not be the greatest film ever made, but certainly the extras on that release make it a pretty fascinating watch altogether. Next up is the amazing Mr. Blunden, which was recently remade in the BBC, which was shown last Christmas in the UK, starring Mark Gatiss. This is directed by Lionel Jeffries after he did The Railway Children, I believe. And this is a fun little children's time travel film, and the special edition comes with an actual a copy of the story that the film's based on, and it's just a lovely little children's film which features time travel. Next is a fairly recent one, Censor, again, which does come in a lovely box. I thought this film was good. not great. It was set in the 80s, but it didn't really feel like it was set in the 80s. And again, because the film is about the line between reality and fantasy, perhaps the fact that it didn't actually feel it was made in the 80s maybe was the point. But the extras are really good in this, on this release, because you actually get a two-part documentary about the video nasties in the 80s, which, if you're being facetious, you could say is actually better than the film. The film itself is good, but I wasn't blown away by it. I get what it was trying to do, but didn't quite achieve it, I don't think. But the two-part feature-length documentary about the video nasties at the time is well worth checking out if you're that way inclined. But the film itself is good. Nothing wrong with it. Next is Fassbinder's World in a Wire, which is the two-part TV film he did, which is about virtual reality. There's a lot in this that prefigures a lot of science fiction films. For me, it could have done with being a little bit shorter, but again, it's still good stuff. Next is a throwback, if you're a certain age, to your childhood, and Flight of the Navigator. This, along with Explorers, with the third version of the Brat Pack, Ethan Hawke and such. But this is the solo story of a little boy who finds a spaceship and his adventures. And again, it's a fun little film. Sadly, if you kind of Google Flight of the Navigator, you'll learn that the little boy has had some problems with the law since he grew up, including robbing a bank in a wig. But this is a fun little nostalgic film. Nothing amazing, but fun nonetheless if you're of a certain age. Next is Raw. This is a film that a lot of people rate very highly. Again, for me, it was a film that was good, not great. I really didn't like any of the characters and couldn't really get into any of the characters. I'm looking forward to seeing Titan, though, by the same director. And again, I'll watch it again. Maybe I wasn't in the right mood. I didn't have a problem with the subject matter. I know some people it is kind of strong medicine, but for me, it was just the characters were all kind of thoroughly unlikable. And again, I don't mind unlikable if it's compelling, but to me, it wasn't really that compelling either, which didn't help. But again, for me, it's still a good film, and again, I will revisit it, but I just wasn't blown away, perhaps the way other people are. But again, everybody's different and everybody sees the same film differently. Next is In Bruges, Martin McDonagh's Belgian swearfest with Colin Farrell and what's his name? Brendan Gleeson. In this one, the special edition, again, you can all get standard editions of this, but the special edition contains the script. And you will see Ray Fiennes in a role that he doesn't play very often as a foul-mouthed gangster, and he probably steals the film. It's a fun little film with lots of swearing. Next is Take Shelter with Michael Shannon as a father who thinks the apocalypse is coming, so he spends all his time and money building a shelter. Also stars Jessica Chastain. And you'll have to watch it to see whether the apocalypse comes or not. Sometimes I'm happy with the ending, other times I'm not happy with the ending. Next is Under the Shadow, which is a really interesting film made by a British Iranian set in Iran during the Iran-Iraq war, and it's a little ghost story which has some genuinely creepy moments in it. And again, it just kind of speaks to the strangeness of these second sight releases. I don't think anybody else would be releasing an Iranian ghost story, but it's actually well worth checking out, and there is, like I say, a couple of genuinely creepy moments in it, and it's an unusual backdrop for a film. Next is The Nightingale, which is really good, but for me it is marred by the villain of the piece being a little bit too cartoonish. This is a brutal film where brutal things happen, so be prepared for that, but it's also kind of beautiful. Set in Tasmania, and a woman seeking revenge with the help or hindrance of an Aborigine. Really beautiful film, but also brutal, but well worth checking out if you have a strong stomach. Next is Session 9, which I did a random review on, starring Peter Mullen and David Caruso, 2001. And again, this is essentially echoes of The Shining, and it's a group of asbestos removal guys who go into an abandoned old mental institute, and strange things happen. And this is another one. It was filmed in a real abandoned mental institute, which is now condos. So whether the people that bought those condos know it used to be a mental asylum where lobotomies were first carried out in the 40s. The making of this, the extras in this are absolutely priceless, as Peter Mullen and David Caruso talk about all the weird things that happened while they were filming it. So this is an example of a film. The sound design's brilliant, the location is obviously brilliant. This is an example of the whole release just being absolutely wonderful if you put together the extras and the story behind the making of it. So this is a really good one if you're that way inclined. Next is another one I did a random review of, Swallow, which is, as I said in the random review, it's the opposite brother or sister film of Butt Boy. Instead of a story of a man putting objects up his bottom, this is a film about a woman putting objects down her throat. But you can check out my random review of this for further details. But it's a beautiful film. It's a kind of sad film, but it's a film that does have a wonderful proper ending to the way the story was going. And it is a real treat if you want to check it out. Next is a film that was a lovely surprise. That's Upgrade, written and directed by Lee Winnell, who's more famous for writing certainly the first Saw film. I don't know about the others. But this is a real low budget science fiction film. But despite the low budget, it really works, and I thought it was a lovely little film, which was a pleasant surprise. Again, this one's available on a standard release now. Next up, two films that perhaps objectively aren't better than some of the films that I've listed beforehand, but they're just so much fun. And it's a couple of Amicus portmanteau films, The House that Dripped Blood, which is just so much fun. Ingrid Pitt and John Pertwee and Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing. I mean, what more do you want, really? And then the other one from Amicus, glorious little Amicus, another portmanteau. This is Asylum. This is the one I kind of prefer to The House that Dripped Blood. Again, this has got Herbert Lom and Peter Cushing, and Patrick McGee. I always get them mixed up. This one has a really fantastic one involving Well, I'm not going to tell you. It's just fantastic. Again, objectively, are they great films? Perhaps not, but they're just so much fun. Who doesn't love a good portmanteau? Please don't tell me in the comments. Next is another Peter Medak film, The Changeling with George C. Scott. As you all know, I'm not a huge George C. Scott fan, but I've got quite a few of his films. This is a wonderful haunted house story, and again, this limited edition I think also has the soundtrack. George C. Scott is wonderful, and there is a couple of genuinely creepy moments in this one as well. Next is perhaps an outlier if you actually look at all these other films. The Color Pomegranates, the art house classic. For me, again, I'm not perhaps as high on this as other people are. For me, it's still a 4 out of 5. It's got amazing images, but for me, they don't all kind of hang together, perhaps as well as other people think. But again, that's just my opinion, and my opinion, as we all know, is not fact. This one has 2 cuts of the film, and it's absolutely beautiful. Some just mind-blowing images. That's The Color of Pomegranates, and again, perhaps a bit of an outlier for all the other ones. Next up, down to number 3, and it's Nicholas Roeg's Walkabout. And again, this is an absolutely lovely special edition. Again, this has the story as well, in book form as well as film form. I wasn't a huge fan of this earlier in my life, but I think this has really aged beautifully. The cinematography, that wonderful shot where we're in the city and then all of a sudden we're in the outback as the camera creeps along a wall, is absolutely beautiful. Yeah, it's just a great film. There's no need to talk about the plot because I'm sure everybody knows what it's about. And this is an absolutely beautiful addition by Second Sight. Speaking of beautiful additions, number 2 is Romero's Dawn of the Dead. This is just the Blu-ray box, not the 4K, because I don't have that capability yet. Again, a film that perhaps has went down slightly in my ratings, but it's still at least a 4. Depending on what mood I'm in, it's a 5 as well. And this edition is just packed with goodies. It was expensive, but you're only dead once. And then that means there's only room for the number 1. And if you followed my channel, I've mentioned this film quite a few times, so you can probably guess what my favourite Second Sight limited edition is. It's, of course, Man with the X-Ray Eye, so Roger Corman. Absolutely adore this film. Have done since the day I saw it, about 30 years ago. Just so good about a doctor who, strangely enough, with little droplets, he gets his eyes see more and more until he sees the universe itself. It's got a great last scene. It's still pretty horrific for considering what it was made, how much it was made for. It's absolutely fantastic. It's only about 80 minutes long. Doesn't need to be any longer because it's literally perfect. It's got a great last line. It's just absolutely tremendous. It starts off kind of playful. Oh, we can see through people's clothes, so we can see people naked. But then as he sees more and more and more, it just becomes metaphysical, and it just becomes absolutely wonderful. Roger Corman's the man with the X-ray eyes with Ray Milland, who always said his 2 favourite roles in his career was The Man with the X-ray Eyes and The Lost Weekend with Billy Wilder, which he won an Oscar for. He should have won an Oscar for this because it's absolutely wonderful. So that's my ranking of my Second Sight limited editions. Please let me know in the comments below what your favourite Second Sight limited edition, as far as release and just for the film itself. I'm always excited to see what people's preferred films are and why, and hopefully you'll join me again for more videos. This is Solitude Ronan from Solitude Ronan Films, saying farewell.